Hi there, this is Steve Yarbrough, and I want to welcome you to my latest video on Mega Live 1.150 update, trolling in landscape mode. This is going to be a tutorial on how to get the best out of the 1.150 update. I have a lot of information to pack into this video, so it's going to be a fairly long video. Because of that, I'm going to put a timeline in the description below that details where the various components appear in the video. I would suggest that you watch the entire thing through once, but then for future reference, you can go back to specific areas if you want. In this video, I'll cover some additional Mega Live setup information that I haven't covered in previous videos. I've gotten a lot of questions from the previous videos about how to set it up properly, so I'll be talking about that in this video. I've also created a pretty detailed optimal lure depth chart that I'll share at various Mega Live angles, as well as various distances of the lure from the Mega Live to keep it in the Sonar beam. I've also shared several different Sonar recordings that I created on my Apex, and those are from anywhere from 40 to 90 foot lure lengths from the Mega Live. And then finally, I'll talk about and show various sensitivity, contrast, dynamic contrast, and color palette settings, and how those impact the image that you get from Mega Live. I took a page out of the Mega Live installation guide, and I've annotated it with some notes that I think that hopefully will help. There's basically 4 positions you can put the transducer in for landscape mode. The first one is basically one click down from horizontal, and that's the top dash or the top line. I like to think of it as 10 degrees down, but Humminbird calls it 80 degrees up. So they measure everything from straight down, from the down mode. The second one is 20 degrees down. Again, Humminbird calls it 70 degrees up. The third one is 30 degrees down. Humminbird calls it 60 degrees up. And the fourth one is 40 degrees down. Humminbird calls that 50 degrees up. In my case, I almost always use the 20% down unless I'm trolling in really shallow water. I'll use 10% in order to keep the bottom from encroaching on my lures on the view. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. For my typical use, 20 is the best all-around setting that I typically use. If I'm going to be in really, really shallow water, 20 foot or 25 foot, I'll use the 10 degree down, but 20 degree is my go-to. In order to depict and show you the impact of the various angles, I've created 4 graphics here. The first one is 10 degree down. Humminbird calls 80 degree up, and it's a fairly flat angle. And I use this if I'm fishing 20, 25 foot bottom so that the bottom doesn't creep in on my lures. That's the only time I use it is when I'm fishing really shallow and the fish are shallow. Next is the second notch, second click, and it's 20 degrees down, 70 degrees up. You can see it's a little more angled, so you're going to miss fish closer to the surface. You're going to pick up fish deeper, and this is the one I use more than any of the others, unless, again, I'm fishing really shallow. Next is 30 degrees down, 60 degrees up. And the only time I use this one is if the fish are really deep and I'm over a deep bottom. And finally is the 40 degree down. Humminbird calls 50 degree up. You can see on this one, it's a pretty steep incline. Fish tend to go in and out of the cone really quickly. You've got to have your lures just in the right spot to keep them in the sweet spot of the cone. So I don't really see myself using this one much at all. I did a bunch of testing with the 1.150 update in terms of where the lures would be in the cone at the various angles, as well as when the bottom would start impeding on where the lures show up in the view. and basically created this chart. And the top section, I run A-rigs off my downriggers at about 50 foot back, which puts them about 45 foot from the Mega Live. You'll see that in the video. My U-rigs I run on planer boards at about 50 feet behind the planer board, but the planer boards are back about 10 foot from the rod. So that puts them at about 55 feet from Mega Live. And I've also done testing of the U-rigs at 75 foot from the planer board, about 80 foot from Mega Live. And although you can see them, you really have to keep them in the sweet spot of the cone. So looking at that top chart, basically at 10 degrees, the lure disappears above 2 foot and it disappears below 15 foot. So basically, as long as you've got your lure between 2 foot and 15 foot, it'll be visible. 7 foot is the sweet spot, and it shows up the most bright right in the middle. At 20 degrees, it's 4 foot top, 22 foot bottom, with 12 foot being sort of the sweet spot. 30 degrees, 12, 22, 32. The next section is my U-rigs, which I run behind planer boards, which basically are typically around 55 foot behind the Mega Live. In that case, at 10 degrees, the range is between 6 and 14 feet, with 10 feet being the sweet spot. All the way down to 30 degrees is 18 to 30 with 15 feet. So you can see the chart. I did actually do testing with the lures trailing 80 foot behind the Mega Live, the U-rigs, and I could see them, but they had to pretty much be in the middle of the cone. There wasn't as wide of an area that you could keep them in and have visibility. So it's pretty touchy running them out that far. The bottom may look a little complicated, but basically what that is designed to do is for me to see at what point does the bottom start overshadowing the fish and the lures. So when I'm trolling, if I'm trolling at 10 degrees, on a 20-foot bottom, 45 foot behind the Mega Live, the bottom starts. So if my lures are trailing 50 foot, I'm not really seeing the lures because the bottom overshadows it. 25-foot bottom, it's 60 foot out. 30-foot bottom, 75 foot out. So again, at 10 degrees, it does a better job of not having the bottom interfere, if you will, with the picking up the lures. 20 degrees, again, is where I run it. The problem with 20 degrees is if you're running on a 20 or 25 foot bottom, it's interfering with the lure. So typically I run 20 degrees when I'm running over a 30 foot or deeper bottom. So hopefully this helps. It certainly has helped me sort of figure out, based on what depth the fish are holding, what depth I need to run my lures, and what bottom they're typically holding over, of what angle I need to set my transducer on. Okay, I just wanted to give you a quick idea of what's above the water, which might make you make a little more sense when I'm talking about what's below the water. So this is my setup. I've got a 22-foot pontoon. My downriggers are mounted on the front. On the right, I've got my Solix 12 G3. On the left, I've got my Apex 19. On the Apex 19, I always keep my Mega Live on the left side, and then I have my down image on the right and side image on the right. So that's on the Apex. On the Solix, I have a 70-30 split, and I have my Mega 360 on the right on the 70% screen, which works perfectly for Mega 360 because it pretty much fills up that entire 70% of the screen. And then my chart on the left. I've highlighted the depths that I want to troll with my Lake Master map, and that's what's in green. In terms of the downriggers, I've got 2 rod holders. One of those goes to the downrigger and the other one goes to the planer board, which is that yellow board floating out that keeps the lures away from the boat. So I've got that on both sides. 2 rods on both sides, planer board on the outside. downrigger tracking closer to the boat. On the Mega Live, I've got that mounted to the side of my boat. I've got my Mega 360 and Mega Live. The Mega Live is mounted to the Mega 360 shaft because I don't need to change the Mega Live, rotate it. It's always looking back at the at my lures. For the last thing before we jump into the sonar recordings and do some tweaking is I just want to explain what you're going to see. So this is the typical landscape view, and on top of the view I have overlaid the radial grid. I like this grid for landscape. If you're using a grid, I typically don't use one, but if you're using it, it gives you an accurate representation of the distance from the Mega Live itself. In this case, I'm trailing two umbrella rigs. One's about 63 foot behind the Mega Live, and the other one's about 68 foot behind the Mega Live. There's also a 20-foot bait ball that's in the view that's going out to the edge of the 90-foot recording. Whenever I set this sonar recording up, I had my unit set to a 90-foot distance, so that's what it records out to. So that gives you an idea of what we're going to see, and what I'll do is first show you a couple of videos with my dialed in settings, and then we'll take one of those videos and start playing around with it. In the first sonar recording we're going to look at, I have 4 lures out. I've got 2 A-rigs at about 40 feet, and I've got 2 U-rigs at about 55 feet. I'm going to get rid of the grid here so we can see what's going on, and you can see a fish passing the right U-rig, and actually one stayed and was behind the U-rig undetected, and he actually took it. So I've got a fish on the line. So I basically worked with him to get him in. Then I'm fast forward. I'm redeploying the U-rig. Did a dumb thing. You'll see here in just a second, I actually tangled my U-rig with my A-rig as I was putting it back out. I probably wouldn't have known it if I hadn't have been looking at Mega Live, but now I do. So basically I'm going to bring that in. You can see some fish going in all the way out to the 90-foot mark. I'm going to bring that in and redeploy my A-rig. Here goes the A-rig back in position. And then after I get my A-rig in, I'm going to redeploy my U-rig. There's another bait school going out past the lures out to the 90-foot mark. So next is going to be the U-rig. You can see it. I decided to do it in the middle of the boat this time so I didn't risk getting tangled. Then I'll hook it to the planer board and then get him moved to the outside of the boat so that I don't run into that problem again. So you can see the lures very well on this one. No trouble seeing 40 and 55 foot at all. In this next sonar recording, I basically have 2 U-rigs out, and they are set to 92 feet away from Mega Live. This is really stretching it, but I wanted to see what I could get done and how far out I could at least see a lure. It's flickering. It's very hard to see. There comes a school of bait fish that's going over the lure now, over one of them, off. And on this one, I have it set to 120 foot perimeter or distance on the sonar recording. You can see, again, it's sort of flickering, but still being able to pick up anything at 92 feet is pretty impressive. In a second, you'll see a school of fish progressing out toward the perimeter. And right behind them, or right in front of them probably, is a school of bait fish heading out, or I'm going at 2.5 miles an hour, so heading out to the perimeter as well. In all the other videos, I had the transducer set at the 20-degree angle, which Humminbird calls 70 degrees. In this one, I have it at the 10-degree angle, and you'll see it's picking up all kinds of surface stuff here. So the far left is the trail from my planer board, Bubbles Wake. The middle is the trail from my Mega Live and Mega 360 pole. And then on the right is the trail from the motor itself. Whether it's Mega Live or Mega 360, I always say the bottom is my enemy. And the reason I say that is because I tune for things in the water column. And when I do that, it makes the bottom blow, it basically blows it out. It makes it too bright, too grainy. But again, I'm wanting to find things in the water column. So as you'll see in this, this sonar recording, I'm going over shallower and shallower, and it's eventually just going to take over the lures. So the resolution to this is to change the angle of the Mega Live transducer so that whatever bottom you're going over doesn't creep into the image like it does here. This I had on a 20 degree, and I'm over about a 20-foot bottom. This last sonar recording, this is the one we're actually going to use for tweaking things and showing how the various changes impact. I think this is probably the most impressive of all of them. Basically, the lures are 63 and 68 foot out. This is a pair of umbrella rigs that I have attached to my downriggers. And here's a school of bait fish that's about a 20-foot ball of bait that's passing through, and you'll see that it goes all the way out to the 90-foot perimeter of the video and disappears. I don't know how far I could have picked it up, but probably quite a ways. So this is the video we're going to be tweaking. So the first tweak I want to make is to set everything to the Humminbird recommended settings, which was 15 and a contrast of 1. As you can see from this, that on this color palette, this introduces a lot of noise in the picture. Here comes the bait ball. The bait ball looks pretty good at this point. The lures look good, but I just don't like this much noise, and so personally I wouldn't use this setting for this color palette. Next, let's look at the impact of just changing sensitivity in this color palette. First, we're going to go up, and you can see it introduces a little bit of noise, but not too bad. As we go down in sensitivity, our lures start disappearing. So, basically, it really hurts the picking up of what's in the water column. And you can see the bait ball changes, and it goes away as well as you lower the sensitivity. So I'm going to go back to my 17. Next, we're going to take a look at contrast. I'm currently at 17. Again, go down, and the noise really comes into play. As you take contrast up, again, things in the water column start disappearing. Here comes the bait ball. If you go way up on contrast, you can see what it does to the bait ball. Turns it pretty much all red. If you go way down, it shows up well, but you've got a lot of noise. And again, I prefer not to have noise. That's one of the things I love about Humminbird is getting clarity. Next, we're going to look at the dynamic contrast. On the Apex and Solix, it's on the color palette screen. You can see it at the top there, dynamic contrast. Humminbird recommends 1, and that's what I have it set on. As we change this, you can see putting it on a 2, the lures dim greatly. Turning it off is actually better than having it on 2, which is different than the original. Here comes the bait fish. You can see the impact of the 3 different settings on the bait fish. 2 was the best in the first release, but not the case with the 1.150. You really need to use 1. And the last thing we'll look at is the color palette and the impact that has on the image. Right now I've got it in that color palette 11, which is my go-to at this point. I used to like 12 best, but it's just not as strong with this update. You can see the impact of the various palettes as we scroll through them here. In a second, we're going to see the bait ball. Here comes the bait ball. So I'll change the color palettes as it goes up. You can see the impact that has, and in some cases it introduces noise, so you'd have to change your other settings to go with the color palette. I'm going to reverse it now and bring that bait ball back so we can make the look at the remaining color palettes. Here comes the bait ball backwards. So looking at the other color palettes as we go. and finally the number 1. So basically, whichever color palette you settle on, you're really going to need to tweak everything else to make it work for you. So now we're going to put it all together. I'm going to assume I really want to try to make color palette 12 work like it did on the original release. So we're going to try to tweak and see what happens here. So we're starting at our 17 and 5. I'm going to take the all the way up to 20. You can see that the lures are still fading in and out quite a bit. The bait ball's not as bright. So let's take the contrast down and see if that helps. That's going to introduce a little bit of noise. Let's go reverse and bring the bait ball back and do a little bit more adjusting here. Let's on the contrast, let's try dynamic contrast to see what that does for it. Right now, you can see if I go off, it makes it dimmer. 2 makes it really dim. So the bottom line is I just haven't found a way to make this color palette work with the 1.150 update as much as I would like to. Wow, that was a lot. So where does that leave us? Basically, I think what you need to do is decide on the color palette that you like to use, and then do all the other tweaks, the sensitivity, the contrast, the dynamic contrast to match that color palette and see if you can get it to work for you. In my case, the settings I have for focusing on the water column are different than a traditional bass crappie fisherman who's looking at the bottom, looking at structure, and looking at fish on structure. Those settings are going to be different. So there is no magic setting for everything. And even the starting 15.1 setting won't work with all the color palettes that Humminbird recommended. So you've got to sort of figure it out for yourself, what works best for you. In fact, a recent video by Big Jim Fishing, he recommends, if you're looking at the bottom and structure, using the dynamic contrast setting of 2. And he had some pretty amazing, I have to say, some pretty amazing shots of some fish and some structure using the settings that he had on that video. So if you haven't seen it, look up Big Jim Fishing and take a look at his latest video. It's pretty good. At the very end, he has that thing dialed in. In my opinion, the 1.150 update is a vast improvement for the type of fishing that I do. I've got greatly improved lure recognition distances. The fish show up better. They show up further out. And of course, I'm trolling at 2.5 miles an hour, so everything I'm seeing, I'm in motion. It's in motion, so I'm not going to get the pretty pictures of the fish and the fins and all that because there's too much motion going on. But I don't need that. All I need to see is something hovering behind my lure? Are they looking at it and passing on it? Am I tangling my lures? It's given me a whole different way of trolling and fishing. I'm looking forward to future updates, as well as I have a feeling we're going to see Helix, Solix, and Apex control head updates coming out pretty soon. It's been over 6 months since they did the last update, so I think we'll see some, and I think that will fix some of the contrast sensitivity, the fact that you have to bump contrast way down for the right mix in this thing. I think that'll all be reset in the upcoming updates. Like I say, it's been 6 months, so hopefully something's around the corner there. And there will, I'm sure, be future firmware updates for Mega Live as well, that it'll only get better from here. And I'm pretty pleased with where it is at this point. I packed a lot into this 24-minute video, so I hope you found it helpful. As with any new technology, there's an awful lot to learn, and I'm continually learning, so I'm sure I'll be doing future updates and videos as well. Thanks.